We've got Tony Gerdeman on the line from the Ozone to talk Ohio State football. Of course, the Buckeyes in a fourth conference championship game for them since the Big Ten went to this format in 2011, and the first trip for the Wildcats of Northwestern. How you doing tonight, Tony?
Doing pretty good. Looking forward to a full day tomorrow of maybe some crazy action.
Okay. Well, expand upon that.
Well, it just seems like maybe everything is too cookie cutter and planned out for tomorrow as in terms of who's going to win, and everything's going to be chalk. Maybe tomorrow won't be. And, it seems like when you, I guess when you least expect it, you should expect it maybe.
I totally agree. And that's one thing, and one particular reason why Vegas capitalizes on parlays is that you may think you've got a really good selection here. Then, oh, well, I really feel strongly about this one here. Oh, let's tack this one on. Oh, I got 3 or 4 games that I feel pretty strong about. Vegas knows probabilities, and the probabilities are, even though there's maybe a 75 to 80% chance that you're going to nail each one of those, once you start to do the math, the probability of getting all those lined up is minuscule. And that's what we're looking at tomorrow. Is we're looking at Clemson's a 26-point favorite. Yeah. Ohio State's a 2-touchdown favorite. Alabama's practically a 2-touchdown favorite. And Oklahoma's a pretty substantial 7 to 8 point pick against Texas. But if you add all those up together, is there a chance? Sure, there's a very high chance that something's going to come unglued and not stick to the formula.
Well, you mentioned Northwestern being a 14-point underdog. All of their games this season have been decided by 14 points or less. So that's right in there. And to expect Ohio State to maybe do more than that would be something that hasn't happened for Northwestern yet this year.
So it's a great point and gives indication as to what my prediction was, at least in regards to the point spread and where I've backed that up financially at this point. The Wildcats at a full 2 touchdowns. I didn't expect it to be quite that high. I wouldn't be shocked. Of course, Ohio State is the athletes. And anytime you look at 14 points in particular, it could be a really good game. It could be a touchdown game, obviously, with 10 minutes left. And then the Buckeyes tack on a TD and a field goal and pull away and win by 17. And it was a good game at 17 all or 20 to 17, but certainly it turns out 34-17. So point spreads are tricky, and there's a reason why. That's a tough curve to get in front of. What would be the most likely of the games to fall to the underdog for you?
Oh, man. Maybe Georgia, because they're the best of the underdogs. Mm-hmm. We talk about how Alabama is the best Alabama team ever, the best college football team ever. But if Georgia is as good as people say, then maybe they're going to be in the game longer than anybody else, and they have the ability to maybe defensively hold Alabama down a little bit and make things closer than people expect. You with like Northwestern and Ohio State, I think Ohio State's offense right now is clicking. Northwestern's offense really doesn't scare you too much. So, I feel decent about Ohio State being able to cover that. Clemson, Pittsburgh, I'm just going to stay away from that. I don't need to get involved with that. Same with Oklahoma, Texas. There's the revenge factor, but as we saw last week with Ohio State, Michigan, revenge only carries you so far. And with those two, I'm not. Would you be surprised with any outcome with Oklahoma and Texas?
No, not at all.
Yeah.
I picked Texas to win the conference at the start of the season. So I was dead right on Utah, Washington, Texas, Oklahoma, Georgia, Alabama when the season started. I had Clemson and Ohio State in their respective championship games, but I had them playing Wisconsin and Miami. So I'm just for ego's sake pulling for Texas to complete my prediction from the preseason, but I'm not necessarily picking them to win the game. But I do like the 8 points. And I would like to see it's possibly a misnomer. I don't know that anybody's run the numbers. You hear this, it's difficult to beat a team twice in the same season. Well, I understand the thought process behind that, and I don't disagree with it, but I also don't agree with it because I don't know what the numbers would say over a long period of time in those situations.
Well, in basketball, they say it's hard to do it 3 times in a row.
Sure.
3 times in a. It must not be that difficult to do it 2 times in a row in basketball, or else it'd be a saying in basketball, right? So, I don't know that football is too different. We just don't see it that often. And it sounds like something that's fun to say. I'm sure it is difficult. It's difficult to beat them the first time, so the second time would be difficult as well.
I heard Joel Klatt say this week, and I have great respect for him and follow his analysis, but he was putting the Ohio State's challenge, comparing it to the 2014 result, and basically saying, and I don't know if this was his intent, but the way it was stated was basically, well, if Ohio State goes out and beats Northwestern 59-0, then they should be able to, trump Oklahoma. Well, to expect them to go out and win 59-0 is a bit ridiculous. I don't know that we could expect anyone to do that. But what do you make of this Oklahoma-Ohio State comparison?
I think it's interesting for a number of reasons. You mentioned the 59-0. If that is the bar, Ohio State has set that bar, and if they have to reach that again, that's unfair to Ohio State to have to be able to repeat that performance. I do think they need to be more impressive than Oklahoma. But then you've also got, Oklahoma still doesn't have the bad loss that Ohio State does to Purdue. Oklahoma, that game is at noon. So Ohio State will know what they need to do, but that could almost be as much of a hindrance as a help, because they are going to look at that score and already have maybe a score in mind of what they need to do. Urban Meyer has said that that won't be the case, but you have to expect that it's going to be the case in some form or fashion. The score will be known. They'll know the game before they get out there in warmups. So, but they have to be careful not to coach the game to reach a certain point total. You have to beat Northwestern, because if you don't do that, then you lose all hope. But it's going to be interesting to see how they marry the two. And we've seen before where, teams try to set a bar, and by worrying about the bar, they're missing everything beneath it, and the opponent can get the upper hand because of that.
And as you mentioned, they're no joke. From an athletic standpoint, there's no comparison between the two rosters, but they somehow figure it out. And this particular season, I've mentioned Northwestern maybe to you in the past in regards to being able to play, upper division Big Ten type football in recent years under Pat Fitzgerald. But they have that game or two typically every year where, okay, they weren't on point fundamentally. Yeah. Therefore, Michigan, I remember Tennessee in a bowl game, even though Tennessee had a lower ranking and less wins, the athleticism of those kind of teams showed up, and all of a sudden, it's really ugly. Mm-hmm. It seems almost to be the inverse this year. They got off to the rough start. They lost to inferior teams, especially the Akron being the famous example. But they've played up to their competition. They almost beat Michigan. They almost beat Notre Dame. And then they beat everyone that would challenge them in the Big Ten Western Division, and were given no respect. We're an underdog in all those games, but they beat Wisconsin, Iowa, Purdue, and a decent Minnesota team, as it turned out to be.
Yeah, I think there's a point this season where not too long ago they were being outscored by their opponents, and yet here they are still, winning most of their games. The Michigan game, they started 17-0, and then you mentioned the athleticism. Like Michigan's athleticism eventually wore out. The depth that Michigan had compared to Northwestern. But they have the ability. They have a veteran quarterback, Clayton Thorson, I think, has 51 career starts. They've got, the young running back, Bowser, who has only played half of the season, but they've been, 25, 27 carries a game. I still think that what they do offensively, while they will try to spread you out, they don't do it with as dynamic athletes as we've seen, as Ohio State has seen with like TCU, Maryland, Purdue. There's no Rondale Moore for Northwestern, and Ohio State fans should breathe a sigh of relief because of that. So it's a little bit like last week with Michigan, where they would run multiple tight ends and a fullback. Sure, if one of those guys breaks free, he's only going 20 or 30 yards. He's not going 90 like Anthony McFarland or Rondale Moore or Kevontae Turpin or any other of these guys they've faced. So while Northwestern may move the ball, they're going to have to go, first down, first down, first down, move the chains and score that way. And that gives Ohio State an advantage. But Ohio State's going to have to do the same thing because of Northwestern's defense. They're zone. They keep everything in front of you. So it's going to be an interesting matchup of, Ohio State's offense has to stay patient with their passing game, which they are a patient offense. They've gone games without taking shots downfield. Dwayne Haskins is fine throwing 7-yard slants and stop routes. So while it's a different defense that they'll be facing from last week where Michigan's man defense set up for Ohio State perfectly, this is a little bit differently, but Ohio State's patient enough that I think they will eventually wear Northwestern out like Michigan did this season.
Got Tony Gerdeman on the line from the Ozone. You got to join him right there, theozone.net for Ohio State football coverage and also Tony's podcast. When is that released, Tony?
The Buckeye Weekly podcast every Wednesday morning, Tuesday at midnight-ish. Also, we do an instant reaction after every game. So that one gets released Saturday night, Sunday morning. So look for those as well.
I have yet to check it out, but that instant analysis reaction right after the Michigan game must have been something.
Yeah, that was we try to keep them in about 30 minutes. That one I think went about 55 minutes. So there was a lot of people, there's a lot of feedback from people. Surprisingly, they enjoyed that one. So we had plenty to talk about. I think a lot of it was just like, how did that happen?
Yeah, I try to detach myself from emotion when making these selections, not just being an Ohio State fan, but in any situation, having a feeling, because it's easy to see the results on Saturday night and think, oh, I should have picked that one right because, man, I had a feeling. Well, yeah, it's easy to in hindsight, but that was a game in which I just kind of succumbed to the track record of the 11 games and then the 6 common opponents and just thought, this is overwhelming that Michigan is going to win this game based on how they're playing versus like opponents versus Ohio State, especially the quality opponents, Penn State, Michigan State, thinking of somebody else, and just the Wisconsin effort, the Nebraska game in particular. But as it got to about Wednesday, I just had this thought that Ohio State, they're going to show up. They're going to be a different team. That crowd is going to be energized just to push them. And Urban Meyer, and just all of it came back as this is still a more talented roster, not substantially, but it is decidedly a more talented roster. And I just have confidence they're going to fix enough to get it done.
It's funny. I've talked to a lot of people, and my comments are a lot like yours, where the further I got away from that Maryland game, the better I felt about Ohio State's chances. And Tom Moore, who's on the podcast with me, said that's why he did his staff pick. We do a staff pick every week. We release it on Fridays. And that's why he wrote his on like Tuesday, because he could just feel himself feeling better about Ohio State's chances, which felt kind of like, we've seen them tank before. Michigan has played well. At what point are you like really feeling like this, or is just getting confused by the closer you get to the game, you feel better about Ohio State's chances? And I ended up going with Michigan by 7. I think he did as well. But we did a podcast every day that week. On Thursday, I solicited Michigan fans' concerns on Twitter. So all of the Michigan fans who follow me, of which there are quite a few actually, they sent me all of their concerns. And pretty much everything you saw in that game was part of it. Jim Harbaugh clamming up with the offense. The Ohio State's inside routes over the middle was there. And then on Friday, we did a show which was what needs to happen for Ohio State to win. And everything you saw there, we talked about it on the Friday show. So that the Thursday and Friday, Michigan fans described what they didn't want to see. Friday, we described what you'll need to see. And you saw it all there. But nobody, I was telling somebody on the field at like 55-32 or whatever, if you had picked this score, your organization would have fired you. You can't go like, yeah, I'm feeling like 62-39, and then they'd show you the door.
Especially for those of us that have been watching this game play out for years, there's just something that doesn't feel right about a 62-39 Ohio State Michigan game. Isn't this thing supposed to be 17-13? Yeah.
It's exactly you look back, there's some blowouts in the Rich Rodriguez era, but that doesn't really even count, and if somebody's scoring 32 or 39, then Ohio State is scoring 42 like in the 2006 game. This one was just way different. And the fact that Ohio State gave up 39 points and people come out of that game feeling good about the defense is a little bizarre, because you think back to the 2006 game, and then once they got beat by Florida after that, people were like, well, yeah, we should have seen that coming because they gave up 39 to Michigan and then 41 to Florida. You look at Ohio State's defensive season this year, and they're like, hey, they look pretty good against Michigan. And I'm like, 39 points though. But, some of that was late, and it was Michigan had to score. But that was a game where, and then I asked a few of the players this week, what's more fun, beating them in double overtime like in 2016 or blowing them out like this time? And KJ Hill said this was more fun. I think Jordan Fuller, the safety, said this is more fun because he played more in it. But Isaiah Prince, the left tackle, all Big Ten, first team all Big Ten, said it doesn't matter how Ohio State's beat Michigan, how they beat them, just as long as they beat them, so that Michigan does not have bragging rights. They can't say that they beat Ohio State. And as long as they get their gold pants, they don't care how it is.
Well, second to Ohio State is your coverage of Michigan football. So how do you take the state of the program, which seems to be in solid shape from where I'm sitting, but obviously the reaction is going to be based on the game. And sure, they have to win. I don't want to de-emphasize that game's everything, or close to it, in regards to that being the rivalry, but that's also the team that's in your way. So Harbaugh has to get it done at some point, but I'm not ready to pull the plug and just give up hope if I were a Michigan fan on their ability to break this through at some point.
No, I'm with you. And it's hard to blame Jim Harbaugh. You should blame Urban Meyer, basically, because that's been the problem with Michigan football since Harbaugh arrived. And yeah, I don't think anybody would have expected him to go 0-4 against Ohio State in his first 4 opportunities. But when you think about Jim Harbaugh getting Michigan back to where they were, he's got them there now. They have been top 5, top 10 each of the last few years, top 12. So they are in the mix. It's just this last game against Ohio State, they haven't been able to get over the hurdle. And that's Urban Meyer's fault. You look at how he is against all of his rivals. And so, maybe that will change here shortly. There's all of this speculation about Urban Meyer's future. But I think Michigan is fine with where they are. Or I don't know if I think Michigan is fine. I don't know if they think they're fine. But Michigan has never really been like a top 3, top 4 program year after year. They can get there. But overall, this is what they are. This is who they are. And if they think they can be better, that's fine. Who's going to do it for you? I mean, I think we all agree that Jim Harbaugh was the guy to do that. And he's showing that he can get them to this point. Maybe once Urban Meyer is gone, he can get them beyond that. We'll see.
So this is a great point that you make, and it's been in my head ever since the criticism following the result last Saturday, but I just didn't directly verbalize it this way, but you just did, is that I've been watching Ohio State and Michigan and the rest of college football since the late 70s. And Michigan's not had a stretch of football like a Florida State, like a Miami did, like Ohio State has over the last 10 to 12 years. They have not had a string of we're losing 0-1 or maybe 2 games. That hasn't happened. They won a national championship in 1997. They've had a smattering of a couple other seasons, like a 2006, where they had a top 5 finish. 1985, they had a really good season, which they went 10-1-1, finished in the top 2 or 3 in the country. But other than that, yes, they have the story tradition and all the wins because of the compilation. And, I'm certainly not trying to downgrade Michigan's history or their status in college football. But since I've been watching, and certainly I can read a record book to see what happened before that, but since the 70s, yes, they've been very good and one of the top 10 programs in the country most of that time. But there's a lot of 9-3, 10-2 over and over and over and over, and 8-4s, and that's, it's not like Lloyd Carr was winning like Urban Meyer 91% of his games, and then all of a sudden they're awful, and then Harbaugh comes back and he can't get them to Alabama status. No, he's going 10-2, 10-3.
Yeah, they're somewhere stuck between like the 90s Tennessee and Penn State now-ish. They're not really Texas or Oklahoma because both of those programs have had those runs that you talked about. So this is about as good as it has gotten for Michigan. And if people think they can do better, that's fine. But we've seen what happens. Like, this is a bit of an off example, but Glenn Mason in Minnesota, when Minnesota thought they could do better than Glenn Mason, I don't know, who do you turn to other than Michigan? And then what do you expect from them beyond that? If your coach doesn't get a national title in 3 years or a playoff appearance, are you firing them? Because when you put restrictions like that, you really, that puts a lot of pressure on the guy, but it's also maybe like not realistic. And Michigan should compete for national titles because they invest, and they have resources. I think Jim Harbaugh is underachieving in terms of recruiting, and so maybe they can do better there with somebody else. But I don't see any reason right now. If anybody should be fired, Michigan should be firing Urban Meyer.
I should challenge myself to recite these scores off memory because I like to try to do that sort of thing, but I'm too lazy, and you don't want to sit here for 15 minutes. We'll go to Bo Schembechler's run here at the end of his career, the last 10 years or so. 10-2, 10-2, 8-4, 10-2, 9-3, 8-4, 9-3, 6-6, 10-1-1, 10-2, 8-4, 9-2-1, 10-2, 9-3, 10-2, 9-0-3. Remember that one with the 3 ties. Yeah. 8-4, 8-4, 9-4. Yeah, so very good teams, typically finishing roughly top 10 to 15 in the country, but not going on that Miami or Florida State or recent Alabama or Ohio State or Clemson run of basically you win every game except for one season after season after season.
Yeah,
they've never been that.
You could probably take the last 15 or 20 years of records of Michigan and Wisconsin, put them side by side, and have people guess which is which. And
I'll take Wisconsin.
But like if you did a blind resume of them and say which do you think is which, I don't know that people would be able to tell the difference.
Yeah. Good stuff with Tony Gerderman from the Ozone. Before we let you go, Tony, any last notes on this one? Yeah, not necessarily the marquee matchup that Buckeye fans were looking for or to impress the College Football Playoff Committee. I just hope that the name Northwestern and the stereotype of workman-like lunch pail guys that don't have a lot of speed and athleticism doesn't resonate too much, that an Ohio State 34-20 win is just like, well, that was nothing.
Yeah, and they have done that a little bit this season where maybe they've not taken their opponent as seriously as they should have, like Maryland, for instance. Purdue, you could say, even though I think Purdue just blitzed them and they had no answer for it. And then you're coming off of the Michigan game where you're feeling pretty good about yourself. They let them celebrate for a little bit, and then they turn their attention towards this game. But the Big Ten Championship is what that is their goal every year. So now that they have reached the precipice of it, I would expect them to be locked in. You remember last year they started out pretty well against Wisconsin in the Big Ten Championship game. And then a lot of it, I think, is because JT Barrett was hurt. They pretty much just went to protect their lead, and the score got closer, and it wasn't as, as dominating a performance as it could have been. This year, they don't really have that same need to protect their quarterback. It's not like Dwayne Haskins is coming into this game off of a meniscus tear or whatever. So they'll be able to go full out for the entire 60 minutes, and I think they'll need to. And when Jim Tressel was the coach at Ohio State, he used to put some real poundings on Pat Fitzgerald, and those two remained close. Urban Meyer and Pat Fitzgerald are close. So if Urban Meyer has the chance, he's probably going to try to put a number on Pat Fitzgerald and then just hope that Pat will forgive him afterwards. But again, you see enough of these Ohio State games and you see them struggle against teams they shouldn't. I expect Ohio State to win. If they don't, nobody could be all that surprised.
And I also was stating that, Tony, from the standpoint of the selection committee or public perception that, yeah, Ohio State went out there and won 34-20, and it was only Northwestern, and they're not fast or athletic or really that good. So that's really not impressing us.
Right. Well, the other danger is if they do go out and blow them out, then you're like, the committee could be like, well, this was not a quality opponent. This tells you how bad things are in the Big Ten.
Absolutely.
And so as we've seen with the committee, they'll use whatever data they have to confirm what they already believe.
I was saying the same thing to Michigan fans last week when they were skeptical about what may shake out for a college football playoff appearance if Alabama doubled up in the SEC or whatever. And they were like, and I said, what you need to have happen is you need to win a respectable game against Ohio State, but not kill them so bad that people are like, yeah, that Ohio State team's awful. We saw them almost lose to Maryland. So you don't want to beat them 34-7. You want to beat them 27-17, respectable win kind of thing. Yeah, it's an interesting thing. And like you say, it's funny that Urban Meyer speaks to the mindset of the players going into that game based on the Big 12 result. But of course, we can only conjecture how it would affect play calling versus, let's say, Texas wins and Ohio State's up 24-14 in the second half. Yeah. Are they just protecting that lead and sitting on the ball and punting and pretty comfortable with that lead versus they're up 24-14 and Oklahoma won? They beat Texas by 3 touchdowns.
Yeah. Well, and it won't just, it's not just necessarily the coaches. It could be Dwayne Haskins, whose first read is to dump it off for a 3-yard gain versus, we need points because I saw the score. So he might be taking shots that he shouldn't because he's feeling the pressure of wanting to get the Buckeyes on the board as much as possible, as often as possible. And even though the coaches might be talking to them about that, they've got their phones until about 4:00. They can see all of the scores they need to, and they know what they need to get. And that's where I don't know what the coaches will tell the players other than do what we've been doing all week in practice, and then hopefully they'll listen and won't try to press, and hopefully the coaches aren't feeling the pressure themselves, and then the players feed off of that as well.
All right, Tony. I always enjoy the conversation, enjoy the insight and the information. You do a great job, and enjoy the game, championship weekend, and we'll see what the result is actually on the field, the tangible result on Saturday night, and then we can only second guess what 13 people are going to decide on Sunday.
Yeah, just don't expect to be happy. Then you'll never be disappointed.
Absolutely. Thanks, Tony. Have a good one.
Have a good one.